The sky over the valley was the color of bruised steel when it happened. The air was sharp with the bite of oncoming winter, and the villagers stood in a tight half-circle at the gates, their torches burning low as if even the fire hesitated to witness what they were about to do. In the center stood Lena, her arms wrapped protectively around the frail body of her mother, who leaned heavily against her side. The old woman's breath came shallow, her cheeks sunken, her lips pale as frost. The voices of the villagers rose like a cruel chorus, each word striking harder than the last. We cannot feed 2 more mouths. Not with the snow already here. Not with her sickness. Lena's heart pounded in her chest, each beat full of anger, disbelief, and fear. Her mother had been the village healer once. A woman who had brought children into the world, who had treated fevers and set bones, who had sacrificed her own comfort to tend to the suffering of others. And now, when her strength was gone, when her body could no longer carry the burdens it once had, they were casting her out. Lena's voice broke as she cried out to them, "She gave you everything. Every hour, every drop of her strength. How can you turn your backs on her now?" But the people turned their eyes away, their faces stiff and cold. Hunger had stripped them of mercy. Fear had stolen their humanity. A man Lena had once called Uncle spat into the dirt and said, "If you care so much for her, then go with her. But the village will not keep you both alive. We cannot afford pity." The gates groaned open, and Lena felt her knees weaken. She clutched her mother tighter, but her mother, in her whisper-soft voice, pressed a trembling hand to Lena's cheek and murmured, "Don't waste your fire on them, child. We will go. We will find a way. The mountains hold more mercy than these hearts do." Tears blurred Lena's vision as she stepped beyond the gates, carrying her mother's weight as best she could. The gates shut behind them with a hollow finality, and the sound echoed in her bones like a coffin lid closing. The torchlight faded, swallowed by the looming darkness of the forest. A biting wind swept down from the peaks, clawing at their thin clothes. The world ahead was nothing but endless shadow and snow. The first night was cruel. Lena managed to find a hollow beneath an ancient pine, where the thick branches shielded them from the worst of the wind. She wrapped her mother in the tattered blanket they'd been given, little more than a rag, and lay beside her, shivering so violently her teeth ached. She gave her mother the crust of bread they had been thrown as if it were a kindness, and pretended she wasn't hungry. She whispered stories into the darkness, stories her mother once told her of gods and heroes, though her voice shook with cold and despair. Her mother listened with half-lidded eyes, her frail hand never letting go of Lena's. The forest was alive with sounds that night. The cries of wolves far off in the hills, the groan of ice cracking on the stream, the rustle of unseen creatures in the underbrush. Every noise pressed fear into Lena's heart, but exhaustion dragged her under, and she drifted into restless sleep with her mother's shallow breaths in her ear. The days that followed blurred into one another. Lena scavenged for roots, for wild berries left shriveled on thorny branches, for anything she could press to her mother's lips. She gave everything she found to the older woman and ignored the twisting hunger in her own belly. Her feet blistered and bled in her worn boots, her fingers cracked from the cold, but she refused to stop. Her mother was all she had left, and the thought of losing her was more terrifying than the wolves or the hunger. But the forest grew harsher with every passing day. Snow fell heavier, and the cold sank deeper into their bones. On the third night, by the frozen creek, her mother collapsed. Lena dropped to her knees beside her, panic clawing at her throat. She lifted her mother's head onto her lap, brushing snow from her hair, whispering frantically, "Mama, stay with me. Please, please, stay with me." The old woman's eyes fluttered, unfocused. Her lips moved, but only a faint rasp escaped. Lena's tears fell hot onto her mother's face as she clutched her close. "Don't leave me, Mama. I'll find a way, I promise. I'll take care of you like you took care of me. Please, just hold on a little longer." The creek gurgled beside them, its waters rimmed with ice, the sound cruelly indifferent to their suffering. Lena rocked her mother back and forth, her heart breaking with every shallow breath. And then, through the stillness of the forest, came the sound. A crunch. Slow, deliberate. The sound of boots pressing into snow. Lena froze, every muscle tense, her breath caught in her throat. She turned her head sharply, eyes straining into the shadows beneath the trees. And then she saw him. A man emerged from the dark. Tall. Broad-shouldered. Cloaked in furs that shifted like the hide of some great beast. His beard was thick, his hair long, his eyes catching the faint moonlight with an unyielding sharpness. He walked with the weight of the mountains in his stride, steady and certain, as though he belonged to the wilderness itself. Lena's hand darted to a fallen branch at her side. She snatched it up, holding it before her like a weapon, though her arm trembled with exhaustion. The man stopped a few paces away, his gaze falling to the sight of Lena and her frail mother. His voice, when he spoke, was deep and rough, like the grinding of stone. "What are you doing out here with a dying woman in the dead of winter?" Lena's grip on the branch tightened, her voice hoarse but defiant. "Stay back. We don't want trouble." The man raised his hands slowly, palms outward, though the gesture looked almost strange on someone so fierce. "If I wanted trouble, girl, you'd already have it. Now tell me, are you alone?" Her silence was answer enough. He studied her, his gaze lingering on the thin blanket, the old woman's shallow breaths, the desperation in Lena's eyes. For a long moment, the forest was silent except for the howl of the wind. Then he stepped closer, his shadow falling across them like a towering wall. Lena's heart pounded, fear and hope warring in her chest. Finally, the man spoke again, his voice steady, final, leaving no room for argument. "You're coming with me." Lena's heart thundered in her chest as the man's words settled into the night air, "You're coming with me." He stood like a mountain carved from stone, broad and immovable, his breath rising in faint clouds against the freezing dark. Every instinct in her told her to be wary, to guard herself, to distrust a stranger who appeared out of the wild with eyes sharp as an eagle's and a voice that could crush granite. But then her gaze fell on her mother. Her lips were turning blue, her chest rising with painful slowness. There was no time left for caution. If she hesitated, she would lose the only family she had left. With trembling hands, she lowered the branch she had wielded as a weapon, her voice breaking as she whispered, "Please, help her." The man gave a curt nod, as if he'd expected no other answer, and strode forward. Without effort, he bent and lifted Lena's mother into his arms. The old woman seemed to weigh nothing to him, though Lena knew her frail body had been near impossible for her to carry these past days. She scrambled to her feet, stumbling after him as he turned into the forest. His pace was steady, powerful, yet never careless. He moved like a man who knew every root and stone beneath the snow, as though the wilderness itself had shaped him into its own guardian. Lena followed, breath ragged, her heart torn between fear of where he was leading them and relief that, for the first time in days, she was not alone in her struggle. The trail wound upward, narrow and treacherous, lit only by the silver gleam of moonlight breaking through the trees. Lena's legs burned, her vision blurred, but she forced herself to keep up. The man glanced back only once, his piercing gaze landing on her flushed face, but he said nothing. Hours seemed to pass before they emerged onto a ridge, and there, nestled between jagged cliffs, stood a cabin of logs and stone. Smoke curled from its chimney, carrying with it the faint smell of burning pine and something richer, something Lena hadn't smelled in weeks. Stew. Meat. Warmth. Her chest tightened, and tears stung her eyes. The man pushed open the door with his shoulder and carried her mother inside. Lena stumbled in after him, her body shaking as the heat of the fire wrapped around her like an embrace. The cabin was simple but sturdy, its walls lined with shelves of jars, bundles of dried herbs, and tools hung neatly in place. A bed covered in furs rested against one wall, and the fire crackled in a stone hearth, casting golden light across the room. The man laid her mother gently onto the bed and turned to a pot simmering over the fire. With practiced hands, he ladled broth into a cup and held it out to Lena. "Give her this." Slowly. Lena obeyed, holding the cup to her mother's lips, watching as the old woman swallowed in tiny, trembling sips. Color began to creep back into her cheeks, faint but real. Relief flooded Lena so deeply she nearly sobbed. She turned back toward the man, words trembling on her lips. "Thank you. I don't even know your name." He settled onto a rough-hewn chair, his great frame casting a shadow against the fire. "Kale," he said simply. "I've lived in these mountains longer than most men live their lives." He leaned forward, his eyes hard. "And you? Why were you out there with a dying woman and no shelter?" Lena hesitated, her throat tight. The truth was bitter, but there was no sense in hiding it. She told him everything, the whispers in the village, the growing hunger, the fear that had twisted neighbors into enemies, and the night they were cast out. As she spoke, Kale's jaw clenched, his hand curling into a fist on the table. When she finished, silence hung heavy in the room. Finally, he muttered, his voice low with disgust, "Cowards. A people who abandon their own are no better than beasts." Her mother stirred weakly on the bed, her voice little more than a whisper. "And yet you did not turn us away." Kale's gaze softened, just for a heartbeat. "The mountains take enough lives. I'll not add to the count." Then, in the same breath, his tone hardened again. "But don't mistake me for a savior. You'll work if you stay here. These mountains show no kindness to the idle." Days passed, then weeks. Lena learned quickly, for she had no choice. Kale rose before dawn, vanishing into the trees with his bow or axe, returning with game or wood. He taught her how to chop logs without splintering the grain, how to set snares in the underbrush, how to boil snow into drinking water. His words were few, his manner gruff, but beneath his silence there was a steadiness Lena began to rely on. Her mother grew stronger by the fire, sipping broth, chewing dried meat, her cough easing with the herbs Kale provided. For the first time in what felt like forever, hope stirred in Lena's chest. Yet there were nights when she lay awake on her pallet of furs, staring at the roof beams above, wondering who Kale truly was. He bore scars across his arms and shoulders, marks of battles she dared not ask about. His eyes held shadows, a loneliness carved as deeply as the valleys outside. Once, when she asked him why he lived alone, he said nothing, only turned back to the fire, his silence an answer in itself. Winter deepened. Storms came, shaking the cabin with howling winds, burying the world outside in snowdrifts taller than Lena herself. Yet inside, the fire burned, and Kale's presence stood like a wall between them and the wilderness. One evening, as snow hissed against the shutters, Kale looked at Lena across the fire. "You're strong," he said simply. "Stronger than you know. Most would have laid down in the snow and let it take them. But you carried her. You kept fighting." Lena swallowed hard, her throat tight with emotion. No one had ever spoken to her like that, not in the village, not in her life. She met his gaze, and for the first time, she didn't feel like a burden. She felt like someone who belonged. But peace, Lena learned, never lasted long. One morning, the sound of voices shattered the quiet of the valley. Harsh, angry voices, carried on the cold wind. Lena froze, her blood turning to ice as she peered out the cabin window. Down below, in the white expanse of the snow-laden clearing, figures moved, half a dozen men, armed with spears and bows. She recognized the furs they wore, the faces she had once known. The village. They had come. Her stomach clenched. What did they want? To drag them back. To finish what they had started. Kale stood in the doorway, his axe gripped in one hand, his face carved in stone. He glanced at Lena, his eyes burning like fire. "They will not take you. Not unless you wish to go." Lena's heart pounded, fear and fury battling in her chest. She remembered the cold faces that had turned away, the gates slamming shut behind her, the hunger and despair in the forest. She stepped forward, standing at Kale's side. Her voice trembled but did not break. "We're not going back. Not ever." The storm winds rose around them, swirling snow into a furious dance. Kale's grip tightened on his axe, his presence towering like the mountains themselves. Lena felt her fear begin to burn into something else: strength, resolve, the fire of a woman who had been cast out but refused to be broken. And as the men from the village advanced through the snow, Lena knew one truth with absolute certainty: she and her mother had found something in the wilderness far greater than the village had ever offered. They had found life. They had found strength. And perhaps, in the shadow of the mountain man, they had found a home.